Hey everybody, thanks Alexis for having me here and for including my work in this wonderful exhibition. I like to start my talks often with this image, although if you could kind of pretend that I'm not there, because it illustrates sort of this core principle that my work is exploring. Basically the intersection between the physical world around us, the piano, obviously, and the abstract world of computation, of electronics. I grew up playing the piano. I love this instrument because it makes you think so much about sound, the physicality of sound. The idea that when you press a key, it's this lever mechanism that strikes a string, and there's a string or multiple strings for every single pitch. And so it's this kind of ridiculously overwrought instrument that is very heavy and is really just designed to embody the sound that it creates very physically. And the electronic audio speaker, just this raw speaker cone on the left side, which is the interface that we listen to music, recorded music or electronic music, mediated by this speaker that kind of acts as this weird membrane between this digital information or analog electronic signal, right, that music is played back via, and the world around us. It converts it to movement and into sound that we hear. So I want to just play an excerpt of this piece of mine called One Bit Symphony. It's an album, a composition for microchip, basically, that was released like you see it. In a CD case, a complete circuit, and when you plug your headphones into the side and turn it on by flicking this little power switch inside the case, it plays back this sort of 45-minute, sort of never-ending piece of music. And just to play you a little bit of the beginning, it sounds like this. So the one bit that's in this title, One Bit Symphony, refers to the fact that the music that you're listening to consists entirely of one-bit audio waveform. That is to say, on and off pulses of electricity, these the ones and zeros of digital information, binary true-false signals that are outputted directly from this microchip through a volume knob into the headphone jack, and they connect to the speakers in your headphones, and essentially those ones and zeros of information become movement of the speaker membrane, and that translates into sound. So it's this very kind of primitive connection between, a very direct connection between code executing on a microchip via the laws of physics and outputting binary pulses of electricity, electric voltage potentials, which essentially turn into sound by your speakers in your headphones or a sound system or whatever. And actually, my background is in composition as well. I was very anti-electronic sound for a long time, I think mostly because I was really drawn to the physicality of classical instruments. I really loved the mechanism of how they create sound, like bowing the string of a violin, setting into vibration, being amplified by the body of the instrument, and we hear that as the character of that instrument, and same for the piano, same for wind instruments, etc. And I found that electronic sound didn't necessarily have this tangible aspect to it. And that changed a lot for me when I started working with electronics, these microprocessors that you saw in 1-Bit Symphony, these basic electronic chips, which are essentially raw computation. You write software, you download it onto the chip, and essentially it's like an open book. The input and output pins can read and write ones and zeros, and you can connect those maybe to a light or to a motor or to a speaker, and essentially whatever you program the chip to output becomes your raw material. And that kind of made computation into this process that was more physical for me. It started to live more in the world of mechanics and the physical world than the abstract world of mathematics. Computation basically bridges mathematics and the physical world in what I think is a really elegant way. And I started to explore that then in my classical music, basically bringing this basic electronic system, this 1-bit electronic sound, onto the stage through these simple speaker magnets, speaker cones, combined with classical instrumentation, and exploring that in pieces like one for harpsichord or string quartet or accordions, solo cello, etc. This piece, Parallels, will be performed next Friday by me and Perkins Duo for tuned triangles, hi-hats, and 4-channel 1-bit electronics. Vibraphone. So basically like thinking about the mechanism by which all these different instruments make sound, and seeing how that relates with sound basically coming from computation. And that led me to think more about process in general. I think that writing code to output sound made me realize that these processes in the code are not necessarily wedded to sound, that there was something more general that I was interested in. And it led me to start doing mechanical drawings, drawings made by machine, ink on paper or ink on wall, with a very, very simple mechanical apparatus, just these 2 motors connected to the same kind of microchip that I use in my music. And by keeping the system very, very simple, it allowed me to kind of focus on this basic interaction between the code, which is very rote and very absolute, and the physical world, which has texture, and you can't make a perfectly straight line in the physical world. There's the texture of the paper gets in the way, the jiggle of the lines of the motors and everything. So these pieces are kind of like this combination between code and the act of drawing. This led me to think about 1-bit signals in video, and so I started doing these video installations, which then made me think about dance, human beings in the same space as televisions, sort of like musicians in the same space as speakers. I'm just touching upon these quickly just to get through this. And then I started working with this sound, but in a very, very kind of austere way, almost scientific way. This is a series of pieces called interval studies, which are grids of speakers which each emit individual unchanging frequencies of sound, but they're specifically tuned to range over a certain interval. Like the one on the left divides a half step into 49 individual frequencies, and the one on the right is a perfect fourth. And so when you approach these pieces, you hear the totality of these frequencies, and then when you get closer and closer, you zoom in on the sound and breaking down that full spectrum of pitch into individual pitches, basically. And that led to the piece that's on view here, Microtonal Wall, which has 1,500 speakers, which basically span 4 octaves of frequency, audible frequencies. And the experience of this piece is essentially one of hearing white noise when you first enter. The sum of 4 octaves of sound, 1,500 individual pitches. We know that white noise, like white light, is the sum of all frequencies. So this is sort of a gesture towards white noise without actually getting there. And then as you navigate closer to the piece, it kind of zooms in and you can put your ear up to an individual speaker and hear that speaker's contribution to this massive sound. So you'll have to go over there to hear that. Cool. Thank you.